You can eat what the box says is a complete, balanced breakfast every single morning. Feel fine, feel sharp even, while an enzyme deep inside your brain is being pulled away from its only job, dismantling the protein that Alzheimer's plaques are made of. That process is happening right now in tens of millions of people. It starts within 15 minutes of breakfast. By the end of this, you'll understand the IDE Protocol, 3 specific morning changes that address this at the biological level, not the motivational one. Here's what makes this alarming. Alzheimer's doesn't start when you forget your keys. Research from preclinical trials, including the A4 study run out of Brigham and Women's Hospital, has confirmed that amyloid plaques, the physical deposits that characterize Alzheimer's, begin accumulating 15 to 20 years before any symptom appears. That means if you're 55 and noticing the first whispers of cognitive change, the biological process may have started in your late 30s. The question is not whether decline is possible. The question is what you've been doing every morning that either feeds that process or starves it. The invisible villain here is not sugar. That's too simple, and by now almost everyone knows sugar is bad. The villain is what happens to a specific enzyme in your brain when your blood sugar spikes repeatedly, year after year, decade after decade. That enzyme is called the insulin-degrading enzyme, IDE for short. Think of IDE as the janitor assigned exclusively to your brain's most dangerous garbage, a protein fragment called amyloid beta. When amyloid beta accumulates and clumps together, it forms plaques. IDE's entire job is to grab amyloid beta and break it apart before it has the chance to clump. That is its primary assignment. But IDE has a problem. It also responds to insulin. When insulin floods your bloodstream, which happens every time you eat a high glycemic meal, meaning white bread, boxed cereal, orange juice, sweetened yogurt, the standard American breakfast IDE gets pulled off amyloid beta and reassigned to clear the insulin surge instead. The janitor abandons the brain's garbage. The amyloid beta sits there. If this happens once, it's trivial. If it happens every morning for 20 years, you have a problem measured in plaques. This mechanism is documented in research published in journals, including the Journal of Biological Chemistry, and forms the backbone of what researcher Suzanne de la Monte at Brown University called type 3 diabetes, in her work published around 2005 in the Journal of Alzheimer's Disease. The core finding: Alzheimer's disease is partly a metabolic disease of the brain. Not only a genetic one, insulin resistance doesn't stay in your pancreas. It reaches your neurons. We've been told breakfast is the most important meal of the day. Most people accept this as nutritional gospel. Here's where it actually came from. Early 20th century marketing campaigns by cereal companies. Kellogg's and its competitors ran campaigns in the 1900s, framing their shelf-stable grain products as medical necessities. There's no independent controlled clinical trial that established morning eating as categorically superior to any other pattern. A 2019 systematic review published in the BMJ, one of the most respected medical journals in the world, found that the evidence for mandatory breakfast eating is weak, inconclusive, and that a significant portion of the supporting studies were funded by the companies selling the breakfast. I genuinely find this funny in the worst possible way, because the downstream consequence of this particular marketing campaign is being measured in neurological plaques. I spent years eating what looked like a reasonable morning meal, something with whole grains on the label, some fruit, coffee, while slowly building the exact metabolic environment this research describes. I wasn't ignoring my health. I was following instructions that were designed to sell product, not protect cognition. When I eventually started reading the actual studies after my cardiac episode, this was one of the first mechanisms that landed differently than anything a doctor had explained to me. Now, let's move through what actually happens in your body, not abstractly, stage by stage. Within 15 minutes of eating a standard high glycemic breakfast cereal with milk plus orange juice, a combination frequently labeled balanced and heart healthy. On packaging, your blood glucose can spike to levels between 140 and 180 milligrams per deciliter. In a person without diagnosed diabetes, this is considered normal post-meal variation. The medical system largely does not flag it. But research using continuous glucose monitoring in non-diabetic adults, including work from the Weizmann Institute, shows these spikes are not neutral. They trigger inflammation at the level of blood vessel walls, including the tiny vessels that feed your brain. At 30 to 60 minutes, insulin spikes in response. This is normal physiology doing what it's supposed to do. But here is where your janitor gets reassigned. The higher the insulin load, the more IDE is consumed, clearing it. The amyloid beta that IDE would have been processing during this window accumulates instead. This is not a dramatic event. You won't feel it. That's precisely what makes it dangerous. The plaque building process has no symptoms. It runs completely silently for 15 to 20 years. And then one day, it has a name. At 90 minutes to 3 hours, your blood glucose drops, often sharply. If your breakfast contained minimal protein or fat, you experience the crash, low energy, difficulty concentrating, the specific kind of brain fog that people in their 50s and 60s increasingly normalize as just getting older. Most people reach for something sweet. The cycle resets. IDE gets pulled off garbage duty again. Repeated daily, this pattern is what researchers examining lifestyle contributions to Alzheimer's risk are treating as a primary modifiable factor, meaning something you can actually change. Here is the layer most people miss entirely. Repeated blood sugar spikes don't only affect IDE. They also accelerate a process called glycation. Glycation is what happens when glucose molecules attach themselves to proteins, including tau protein, which is the second structural hallmark of Alzheimer's beyond amyloid plaques. Think of it like rust forming on metal. Glycated tau becomes rigid, clumps into structures that pathologists call neurofibrillary tangles, literal knots inside neurons that interfere with how brain cells communicate and ultimately trigger cell death. Advanced glycation end products, called AGEs, have been found in significantly higher concentrations in the brains of Alzheimer's patients at autopsy. A breakfast that spikes your blood sugar is a breakfast that glycates your proteins every morning for decades. And here's the number that deserves a pause. A 2022 study published in JAMA Neurology, tracking over 10,000 adults across an 8-year period, found that the highest consumers of ultra-processed foods, the category that includes nearly all shelf-stable cereals, flavored yogurts, packaged muffins, and sweetened beverages, showed significantly faster cognitive decline and executive function deterioration compared to low consumers. Not marginal, significant. This isn't correlation noise. This is a gradient. The more ultra-processed food, the faster the cognitive drop. The brain is not making these plaques because of bad luck or bad genes alone. It's making them in response to a metabolic environment you are creating 3 times a day. And breakfast is the first signal you send. This is where the IDE protocol matters. 3 components. Each one targets a different part of the mechanism described above. The first component is inversion. Before eating any carbohydrate at breakfast, eat protein or fat first. A hard-boiled egg, a handful of almonds, half an avocado. Research on meal sequencing published in Diabetes Care shows that eating protein and fat before carbohydrates reduces the post-meal glucose spike by approximately 30% compared to eating carbohydrates first. 30% less spike means 30% less insulin. Flood means 30% more IDE available for amyloid beta clearance. The food doesn't even have to change. The order does. The second component is delay. Push your first meal to at least 90 minutes after waking. Here's why this matters. At the biological level, your brain has its own waste clearance system called the glymphatic system, characterized by researcher Maiken Nedergaard at the University of Rochester and published in Science in 2013. This system is most active during sleep and for a period after waking, pumping cerebrospinal fluid through the brain and flushing accumulated amyloid beta. When you eat immediately upon waking, you redirect metabolic energy toward digestion and trigger an insulin response that competes with this natural cleanup window. 90 minutes of delay costs you nothing in terms of energy. It extends one of the only natural amyloid clearing processes your body runs on its own. The third component is exercise first. 10 minutes of movement before your first meal, walking, body weight squats, anything that partially depletes glycogen stored in your muscles. When your muscles are partially depleted, glucose from your meal gets absorbed into muscle tissue first, rather than flooding the bloodstream. This is called improving insulin sensitivity through glycogen depletion. You don't need a gym. You need 10 minutes and the ability to move. The one mistake that invalidates the entire protocol. Consuming liquid calories during the delay window. Coffee with sugar, orange juice, a smoothie. Liquid glucose bypasses the mechanical digestion, delay that solid food experiences. It hits your bloodstream faster than almost any solid meal. If you drink orange juice while doing the delay, you have canceled the delay. Black coffee, water, and unsweetened tea are the only things that don't interrupt the window. Here's what I find genuinely fascinating about all of this. The breakfast habit most associated with Alzheimer's risk isn't some obscure behavior. It's the behavior on the box. It's the habit endorsed by decades of advertising, by the food pyramid, by the cereal aisle in every supermarket on the continent. The most dangerous thing isn't what people are doing in spite of health advice. It's what they're doing because of it. Your janitor has been on the wrong assignment for years. The IDE protocol gives it back its original job. If you're starting the IDE protocol this week, comment janitor below so I can see who's actually acting on this. And if you've never heard the IDE amyloid connection explained this way, subscribe, because this is exactly the kind of mechanism the mainstream health conversation keeps burying under cereal box graphics.